On the day of my divorce, I had a car accident and woke up to find myself back in the year when I was 20 years old. This was the year when Cecil loved me the most. He loved me more than his own life. Looking at Cecil, who had stayed up for several nights by my hospital bed just to wait for me to be safe, I only said one sentence: let's break up. He went crazy. After going through the divorce formalities, I planned to part ways with Cecil at the gate of the Civil Affairs Bureau. He still maintained some of his gentlemanly demeanor and said softly, "Where are you going? I'll give you a ride." It was hard for me not to sneer. "President Cecil, you'd better go back and accompany the future Mrs. Cecil. With her belly. It won't look good if the wedding is held any later, will it?" Cecil's body stiffened, and he stopped in his tracks. He felt guilty towards me, but that didn't stop him from betraying me. We were 28 years old and had known each other for 10 years. His mistress had just graduated from university, and she was young and beautiful. "Hazel, you don't have to say that. We can still be." "Still what? Friends?" I interrupted him and twitched the corner of my mouth. "Aren't you disgusted by that idea?" He finally fell silent. In those once very charming eyes, there were emotions that I couldn't understand flickering. I had known him for so long. From the third year of senior high school to university. And then from when he started his business until he achieved success and fame. I knew what he was like when he left me. And naturally, I also knew when his love began to fade away. It's false to say that I wasn't sad. Everyone around me said that Cecil loved me, and we would definitely grow old together. Cecil thought so too. That's why he was stunned for a long time when I proposed a divorce. Probably because the image of the perfect husband finally collapsed in front of me. After a long silence, he came up with a rather vulgar excuse in my opinion. "Hazel, I just want to have a child." I slapped him. I had been pregnant with a child in the year that was most crucial for his career. I quit my job to help him. And later, the child was lost due to excessive fatigue. I didn't even know that I had been pregnant until the child was gone. That young girl's methods weren't very sophisticated. At first, she left her lipstick in Cecil's car. Later, she deliberately left the scent of women's perfume on him. And then, let out. When she couldn't wait any longer, she came to me with a pregnancy test report. She was wearing a small floral dress and was a bit surprised when she saw me. Probably she had always thought that her President Cecil was keeping a shrewish woman at home, which was why he was having an affair outside. But I didn't look like what she had imagined, and she felt a sense of crisis. I was also a bit disappointed. She wasn't as good as I had thought. So the fact that Cecil had an affair somehow became a bit absurd. I had to compare him with those inferior men who kept mistresses outside after getting rich. A mistress who, in my opinion, was ordinary in terms of appearance, education, and even ability, except that she was younger than me. It really lived up to the saying that anything new and untried seems appealing. Well, not exactly. The young girl was complacent because of the child in her belly that belonged to Cecil. She said that I couldn't have children and that I shouldn't delay Cecil. I laughed and asked her why she didn't let Cecil come and talk to me about the divorce but came to me with her pregnant belly instead. She couldn't answer and even became a bit angry and resentful. I didn't hit her because assaulting others is illegal, and also because she was pregnant. I thought that scolding or hitting her wouldn't be of any use. I mentioned the divorce to Cecil. His young girl was eager to take my place, and I could fulfill her wish. I told him that if he still remembered how we had come through these years, I hoped he could be straightforward about the divorce. The young girl probably didn't know that I owned 20 of the shares in Cecil's company. After the divorce, I could still receive a rather large annual dividend. The cars, houses, and liquid assets under Cecil's and my names were divided equally. Of course, I hadn't really worked much in the past few years, and had indeed been slacking off a bit. He still earned more, but it didn't prevent us from dividing the property equally during the divorce. I'm not a saint. What belongs to me? Even if Cecil doesn't give it to me, I will claim it through legal means. Of course, the most valuable thing was the shares in my hand. Cecil's career only gradually got on the right track after we got married. I used my prenuptial property to support him. He loved me at that time. And I loved him too. I didn't ask for anything in return. He found a lawyer to notarize that he would give me those shares, which were my personal assets. I wonder if he regrets it now. After all, where a man's money is, his love is there too. After the divorce, I went from being a rich wife to a single wealthy woman with 9-digit liquid assets. I still have to thank Cecil for his hard work over the years. But the word love is really too heavy. And I can't afford to play with it anymore. The feeling of realizing that the person sleeping beside you is gradually drifting away but being powerless to stop it. And the pain in my heart is really not a pleasant experience. I tried to let go of him. But 10 years really occupied too much of my youth. Most of the sweetness and bitterness in my memories were related to Cecil. Those opportunistic people in the circle probably don't know how they will laugh at me in the future. Whether I care or not doesn't matter anymore. The dignity between Cecil and me became a joke the moment he had an affair. President Cecil wouldn't be thinking of inviting me, his ex-wife, to be a witness when he remarries or when the child has a full moon party. Would he? I sneered. You've already disgusted me enough. Don't show up in front of me if there's nothing important in the future. I left those harsh words. The street outside was bustling with traffic, and my car was parked by the roadside. I wasn't as calm as I seemed on the surface. Just because I hoped to part with Cecil amicably didn't mean that I could let go easily. I won't wish him happiness. But I think that the remaining love and resentment towards him will gradually fade away with time. There weren't too many cars on the road, so when a car drove towards me, I didn't react in time. The car was driving too fast. At that moment, I heard several exclamations coming from behind me. Intense pain struck, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, the smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils. I opened my eyes and looked at the furnishings around me. It was clearly a hospital. I let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, I didn't die. I hadn't had the chance to squander the family property I just got yet. I tried to move and found that my left leg had no feeling. I tried hard to look down and saw that it was wrapped in thick plaster. As long as it wasn't amputated. There was no one around me. And I wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't until I heard noisy voices at the door. Someone pushed the door open and came in. I instinctively looked over and was suddenly stunned. You child. Why did you go skiing for no good reason? If you hadn't been so lucky this time, what would your father and I had done? The person chattered on, scolding me while bringing up the chicken soup she had cooked. I opened my mouth, and tears fell first. Mom. My hoarse voice was tinged with a sob. This startled Mrs. Chen, went on a lull sigh. Who had been chattering? Quite a bit, you child. Why are you crying just because I said a few words to you? You're not a little kid anymore. Can't I even scold you? Mrs. Chen, who had passed away a few years ago, was standing in front of me alive. I felt even more that this was a dream. When I was 24 years old, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. In the late stage. She didn't last long and passed away. 2 years later, my father wasn't paying attention while walking and fell down the stairs. He had a stroke and also passed away after 2 years of suffering. And in the year when I became an orphan, I found out that the lover who had been sleeping beside me had been with his intern. I was numb for a long time. At this moment, Mrs. Chen was so real that even the words she used to scold me sounded much more pleasant. Mom. Am I dreaming? Mrs. Chen didn't indulge my sentimentality. Are you confused after sleeping? Don't think that I won't scold you just because of this. If it weren't for Cecil risking his life to fish you out of the mountain, whether you could lie here and dream after the avalanche would be another matter. Your father and I only had you. If we had known you would be so rebellious, we should have had another child to raise. The name Cecil seemed distant at this moment. I began to recall that my parents accepted Cecil when I was 20 years old. I had a distinct personality back then. I liked skiing and traveling all over the world. That winter, I went skiing in Xinjiang and unfortunately encountered an avalanche. I was buried underneath. At that time, Cecil risked his life to follow the rescue team to dig me out and saved me. He had nothing at that time. And neither did I. But I liked him. This was the year when Cecil loved me the most. He didn't care about his own life for my sake. I was lying in the hospital ward. And he wasn't in a much better condition either. After Mrs. Chen finished scolding me, I finally realized a fact. I had gone back to the year when I was 20 years old. I hadn't graduated yet. I was poor and had nothing but my ideals and the belief that love was more important than anything else. In the evening, someone came to visit me. It was Cecil with his hands and head wrapped in bandages. The 20-year-old Cecil. His eyes were filled with the open-hearted thoughts of a young man and his love for me. Warm and impulsive. Compared with the 28-year-old him, he hadn't changed much actually. It's just that 8 years later, his temperament became more mature. And he had more of the charm of a successful person. Hazel. How are you? He looked at me eagerly. I examined him for a long time. Really for a long time. My familiar yet unfamiliar ex-husband. Hazel. Why are you looking at me like this? He asked again, his eyes showing concern. Didn't you get stupid from the fall, did you? I finally came to my senses. In the hospital ward filled with the smell of disinfectant, I said softly, Cecil, let's break up. When I said the words of breaking up, I clearly saw Cecil freeze. Hazel, what's wrong? Did I do something to make you unhappy? The 20-year-old Cecil, even though he had just come back from the brink of death for me, would reflect on himself immediately when I brought up the breakup. How did he become what he was later? It's not that I couldn't accept breaking up. It's that I couldn't accept his betrayal. I looked at him. My eyes filled with nostalgia and complexity. Perhaps also mixed with some love that hadn't dissipated yet. But I also hated him. I hated him for making our youth together a joke. Cecil. You didn't do anything wrong. I lowered my eyes. I just want to break up. That's all. Cecil opened his mouth to say something. But my mother pushed the door open and came in. Cecil. You're here too. Auntie has cooked soup for you too. Have some to replenish your strength. My parents didn't like Cecil at first. They said that such a young boy looked flashy and didn't seem reliable. It wasn't until he saved me this time that my parents began to accept him. Then we fell in love. Graduated smoothly. Cecil started his business. We got married. I quit my job to work with him on his career. And then he achieved success. Cecil behaved very well in front of my mother. He called her auntie, one after another, making my mother extremely happy. After he left, my mother was tiddying up and said, I heard everything just now. Why on earth did you mention breaking up with him? Your father and I didn't think highly of this young man before, mainly because you were both too young. At this age, how could you know what you want? But at least he risked his life to save you. Don't you like him anymore? I said sullenly. Yeah. I don't like him anymore. My mother. Mom. Do you think I'm a jerk? My mother gave me a look. Even if you are a jerk, you're still my child. I can't force you to marry him just because he saved you. Can I? At most. Your father and I will give Cecil some money as a token of gratitude. Mom. You're so kind. My mother looked annoyed. Stop being so mushy. You're just like your father. I grinned. Mom. Since you and Dad have been going to the hospital recently, I've made an appointment for you both for a full body checkup. You should go for a checkup regularly every year from now on. There's nothing wrong with us. Why do we need a checkup? It's just a waste of money. How can you say it's a waste of money? Spending money can give you peace of mind. Right. After much persuasion, I managed to convince my mother. As for my father, he always listens to my mother. I stayed in the hospital bed for several days before being discharged. An injury to the muscles and bones takes 100 days to heal. So then I went home to recuperate. Just then, without a low sigh, my parents' medical examination reports came out. The doctor advised my mother to be admitted to the hospital as soon as possible. At that moment, my heart was pounding. She had actually developed the disease so early. Fortunately, hadn't fulfilledly. It was still in the early stage. When my father heard that my mother had cancer, he almost burst into tears. Despite his big size, he was really vulnerable. I still remember when I was 24. My mother had just been diagnosed with the illness and she kept it from me. But her condition deteriorated too quickly. Chemotherapy and other treatments were just delaying the inevitable. Later, my father and I watched as she became more and more haggard and lost more and more weight. When the pain became unbearable, she begged my father and me to stop treating her. The day my mother passed away, my father seemed to age 10 years overnight. Now that God has given me a chance to do it all over again, it's really great. In this life, after my mother was hospitalized, my father shuttled back and forth between the hospital and home. Although I was inconvenient to move around, I also followed and listened to the treatment plan recommended by the doctor. Thankfully, having fulfilled my desire, the surgery was a success, and the huge stone in my heart finally dropped. During these days, I've been focusing all my attention on my mother. So much so that breaking up with Cecil has become a trivial matter. Cecil sent me a lot of messages and also wanted to come and see me. From his perspective, he probably still doesn't understand why I suddenly want to break up with him. Especially when he has done me a great favor. Cecil didn't accept the money from my parents. When I finally recovered enough to go back to school, meeting Cecil was inevitable. We were classmates in our senior year of high school. At that time, the thoughts of young boys and girls couldn't be hidden. And we made an agreement to go to the same school. Come to think of it, we were even considered a well-matched couple in the eyes of our classmates. Hazel. Cecil appeared in front of me. The injuries he suffered before had almost healed. While I was still being taken care of like a protected animal by my roommates because of my muscle and bone injury, I turned around and told my roommates to go back first. Cecil. For some reason, my state of mind was much calmer now. We've already broken up. There was still obvious love and sadness in his eyes as he looked at me. Why? You have to give me a reason. Why did you suddenly want to break up? I couldn't possibly tell him that he would cheat on me 8 years later. He wouldn't believe it. And I didn't have the energy to entangle with him. There's no reason. I just don't like you anymore. I don't believe it. His eyes suddenly turned red, and he grabbed my hand. Do you remember what you said when we were coming down the mountain? You said you loved me so much. His words made me feel dazed for a moment, and some distant memories came flooding back. When Cecil risked his life to save me, I was indeed touched. I should have confessed my love to him during the process of coming down the mountain. In a state of mental exhaustion, thinking that I might be dying, I told him I loved him many times. But those were the words of Hazel at the age of 20. Not me now. Cecil. People change. Unexpectedly, I was now using this sentence against him. But this wasn't enough. It would be really satisfying if I could use this sentence against him when he's 28 years old someday. But you can't change so quickly. Cecil looked at me with red eyes. Hazel. Tell me what's really going on? You've been acting strange since you woke up in the hospital. What exactly happened? Although I knew I should distinguish between the current Cecil and my cheating ex-husband, with the exact same face, I knew it was him. It's just that the Cecil in this time and space is full of enthusiasm and believes in being with one person for a lifetime. Nothing happened. My tone was extremely cold. We're over. Don't contact me in the future. I once thought about taking revenge on Cecil. But at this age, his love was genuine. And his promises were also genuine. He just overestimated himself. Anyway, after the divorce, he gave me all the property that I was entitled to. Even if everything starts over now, I won't make things difficult for myself. There's no need for that. Coming back this time, knowing that my parents are healthy is enough. Cecil didn't want to break up. He did a lot of things to try to win me back, including accidentally meeting me during his spare time, sending me flowers and gifts. I didn't want to accept them, and most of the gifts either got returned or ended up in the trash can. He wasn't rich at this age, but he was quite generous to me. When I saw Cecil downstairs in the dormitory again, I wanted to pretend I didn't see him. Hazel. He grabbed my wrist gently. Just give me a few minutes. Even my roommates couldn't bear to see how heartless I was towards Cecil. After all, he was good-looking, infatuated with me, and didn't have any ambiguous relationships with other women. He was a rare high-quality man. I used to believe that he wouldn't be attracted to any woman other than me. Even during the time he was cheating, he was still nice to me. He even bought me a lot of things. Perhaps out of guilt. But a man's love is like that. He thought he was already treating me very well. Cecil at the age of 28 was in his prime. Full of ambition. It wasn't surprising that there were many women around him. But I also took good care of myself and made myself look beautiful at the age of 28. And there were younger men approaching me too. We went through thick and thin together. But he couldn't be faithful. Hazel. Do you really not like me anymore? Cecil asked. Actually, it wasn't true. Cecil at the age of 20 had really sincere love. I miss him at this age. But I can't repeat the same mistakes with him. Cecil. You'll meet someone else in the future. I said. Stop pestering me. My tone was very calm. And my words were cold. I didn't care what he thought of me. Cecil held my hand. And there was sadness in his voice. Won't you really give me even the tiniest chance? Or have you fallen for someone else? We're done. This was the last thing I said about this relationship. After that day, Cecil didn't come to look for me again. Our school wasn't small. If we didn't deliberately seek each other out, it wasn't that easy for us to meet. People who knew us later came to ask me what had happened between me and Cecil. I didn't say much. Just that we had broken up. My focus was elsewhere. At the crucial moment of Cecil's entrepreneurship, I gave up my dream and joined his company. Actually, I don't regret it because Cecil did succeed. And he also gave me a return. I had a very comfortable life. But given a second chance, I hope to pursue the dream that I once gave up. I once had my own career. But reality also tells me that in the end, love depends entirely on one's conscience. In the last 2 years of college, I focused on my studies and internships. When I was in my senior year, I applied to study abroad. My parents approved of it. Now they go for a medical checkup at the hospital once a year. And they're both in good health. After studying abroad, I didn't know much about what was going on in China. But occasionally some of my former friends would mention Cecil's current achievements to me. The path he took wasn't much different from what I remembered before. Because we were together. My parents were even willing to invest money in his business. Now without my family's support, he had to seek investment elsewhere. Of course, he managed to get it. Cecil's success at a young age shows that he really has a talent for business. But all of this has nothing to do with me anymore. A classmate asked me if I ever regretted it. It's really a good question. I don't regret choosing Cecil in the past, and I don't regret my current decisions either. I still haven't understood why I went back to the year when I was 20 these past few years. But life has to go on. Coming back this time is already a gain for me. The life of studying abroad wasn't easy. And I often missed home. Sometimes I would dream of the past that seemed like another world at night. And then wake up from the dream in a start. In the dream, it was the first time I realized that something was wrong with Cecil. I knew he was lying and hiding something from me. Fortunately, hadn't fulfilled and set, I married him early. And I left my mark on every bit of his career. But at that time, I was still shocked to the core by the news of his infidelity. My parents had already passed away. And Cecil wasn't just my lover. He was also the family member I cherished the most. When I woke up from the dream, I realized that before I knew it, I had been studying abroad for almost a year. During the long vacation in my first year of graduate school, I still came back. My parents felt sorry for me because I had lost weight while I was abroad, so they arranged 3 meals a day for me very carefully. I thought I had no more connection with Cecil. I didn't even pay attention to the class reunion organized by our senior year of high school class. Anyway, having fulfilled my obsession, not many people knew that I was back in China. However, one night, I made an appointment with a college classmate to go shopping. That area was a bustling district with all kinds of places. My classmate and I walked out arm in arm, chatting and laughing. And then I sent this civil servant who had to go to work the next day to her car. When I stood on the roadside and looked down to hail a taxi, someone called me, Hazel. I looked up, and a tall figure stood out under the streetlight twilight. I stopped for a moment. And he had already walked up to me. Cecil was dressed in a suit. It had been less than a year since he graduated from college. And his aura had obviously changed. He had become much more mature and steady. Although he wasn't as mature as he would be in the future. He was becoming more and more like the person I used to dislike in my memory. "You're back in the country?" His voice sounded a bit excited. "Have you been drinking?" I looked at him. He paused when he heard my words and said, "Yes, having fulfilled my obsession. I had a business dinner nearby. I didn't drink much." He was lying. He has a good tolerance for alcohol. His current state indicates that he has already drunk quite a bit. As I remember. At this time his company wasn't stable yet. And there were a lot of business dinners and social engagements. In the past, he had come home drunk and laid on my lap, saying how uncomfortable he was. But now I have no intention of reminiscing with him. Cecil continued. "Let me take you home. It's not easy to hail a taxi at this hour. I'll ask the driver to come over." "No need." I refused. He suddenly fell silent. His eyes dark. In the dim light of the night, for a moment, he looked very much like the him a few years later. Cecil smiled, with obvious sadness mixed in. "Almost 3 years have passed. And I still don't understand." He looked at me and said, "How can a person change so quickly? If your feelings for me have changed, I can accept that. But as far as I know, you haven't been in another relationship. You've been a bit strange since you came back from that skiing trip. But I can't put my finger on what exactly is wrong. He really cares about me. But it's precisely because he doesn't know that the one whose feelings have changed is not me, but him." Cecil took a step closer and said softly, "I'm working hard to make money now. You're studying abroad. I can afford to wait for you for a year or two. Or even a few years. I can also go abroad to accompany you when I have time. Do we still have a chance?" If it were the 28-year-old Cecil, I would not hesitate to call him disgusting. But just as it is now, this young him is willing to lay out all his enthusiasm in front of me, making them seem like two different people. I took a step back and shook my head. "Cecil, it's impossible for us. But why won't you even give me a proper reason for breaking up?" He grabbed my hand and stepped closer again. "I don't believe that our feelings can fade away so quickly. What exactly happened back then?" I shook off his hand, feeling a bit irritated. "Nothing happened, Cecil. You're not a child anymore. There are some things you can't force. Don't you understand? I know clearly that they are the same person. The love was real. Even the 28-year-old Cecil, after he had an affair, dared to brazenly say that he still loved me. A man who can sleep with another woman while still claiming to love you. I can no longer understand his so-called love. I wanted to stay away from him. Just then, let out a low sigh. A drunkard stumbled and bumped into me from behind. I was pushed towards the roadside. And a car suddenly rushed out. Cecil instinctively stepped forward to pull me back. Everything happened so quickly. And the car still hit me. Before losing consciousness, all I knew was that Cecil, and I rolled on the ground a couple of times. Am I doomed to have bad luck with cars in both my last life and this life? But the feeling of dizziness hit me so violently that I fainted before I could react. When I woke up, it was already morning. I was in the hospital, and there were quite a few small cuts on my body. I suddenly remembered that I hadn't gone home all night, and my parents might be extremely worried. I took out my phone and found that it was already blacked out and broken. A nurse came in and saw that I was awake. "You're awake. What's your relationship with the person in the next bed? You two were brought to the hospital together last night." I turned my head and saw that Cecil was lying in the bed next to mine. He wasn't awake yet. "Excuse me, could I borrow your phone to make a call?" A nurse didn't say anything and handed me her phone. I first dialed my father's number. But the other end said it was an empty number. I was stunned for a moment. A number was correct. I continued to dial my mother's number. And it got through. After a while, a young girl's voice came. "Hello. Who's this?" Something was wrong. A nurse saw that my expression was off and asked, "What's wrong? Didn't the call go through?" I asked her in a trembling voice. "Excuse me. What year and month is it now?" She pointed at the phone screen in my hand and said, "It's right here." She probably suspected that my brain was also damaged. I didn't care about what others thought. Because I saw today's calendar. I'm back. In the original time and space that belonged to me. My parents were already gone. So of course they wouldn't answer my call. My eyes welled up with tears. But I still dialed another number. After a moment, the most familiar voice came. Hello. I took a deep breath and said to the other end of the phone. Hello. This is Hazel. Could you please come to the hospital and pick me up? After returning the phone to the nurse, I waited in a daze. Cecil woke up not long after, and the first thing he saw was me. Hazel. Are you okay? I ignored his touch and was still lost in thought. I should have taken a good look at my parents before going out yesterday if I had known I would come back. My mother's cancer had clearly been cured, and there was no sign of recurrence. But since nothing has changed after I came back, it can only mean one thing: I've returned to a parallel universe. The call I just made further confirms this. I couldn't hide my disappointment. Only Cecil still didn't understand the situation. After confirming that I was okay, he started to worry about his company and wanted to give instructions to the people in the company. As expected, his phone wasn't working either. Hazel. Why haven't you said a word since just now? Are you feeling unwell? I looked up at him and, for some reason, felt a bit pleased. Cecil. Didn't you want to know why I insisted on breaking up with you? You'll find out soon. He was stunned for a moment. What do you mean? Not long after, there were footsteps outside the door, and a man and a woman appeared at the door of the ward. Another Hazel with my face, and my ex-husband Cecil. Hazel. Strangely enough, it was my ex-husband who came forward nervously and looked at me with a bit of trepidation. You're back? Then he was immediately pushed aside by the other Hazel. Get out of the way. Don't touch her. The other Hazel stood in front of me with her hands on her hips, glaring at the other person. And the young Cecil stared in a daze at the other couple, who looked almost exactly like us. Hazel. What's going on? Why are there another you and me? The Cecil who had just been pushed aside remained silent. I stood up, looked at him, and said calmly, Cecil. This is 5 years later. This is another me. And that's another you. In this world, we got married when we were 22. Then you had an affair when you were 28. And your mistress was also pregnant. So we got divorced. For the rest, you can ask yourself. I raised my eyes and looked at the Cecil standing aside. Take care of him. Then, let out a low sigh. I let my another Hazel take me out of the hospital. It's really uncomfortable to see another soul in my own body. But she's so lively. She came by car. I thought back to the date I just saw. Here. Only about 3 months have passed. The speed of time passing seems to be different in the two worlds. But it's already fantastical enough that our souls and consciousness are in each other's bodies. I thought back to when I was 20. Although I already had a driver's license, I probably didn't drive much. I suggested. How about I drive? She slapped the steering wheel. Full of confidence. I've been driving recently. Trust me. After I mentioned the divorce to Cecil before, I moved out. Now I'm living in a large flat. Hazel drove me back there. On the way, having fulfilled my obsession, she said to me, I never thought that when I woke up one day, I would have a house, a car, and a 9-digit deposit. Thinking about it from another perspective, isn't it pretty great? I smiled and asked her how she had been recently. After listening to her, I found out what had happened during the time I was away. When I had the car accident, Cecil hadn't left yet. And it was him who sent me to the hospital. The car accident wasn't very serious. But the person who woke up in my body had become the 20-year-old Hazel. She was indeed me. But not completely me. When she woke up and saw Cecil, she was so excited that she hugged him and said she thought she would never see him again. Cecil was stiff all over, because in his impression, I hadn't hugged him so passionately for a long time. On the one hand, we had been married for a long time. On the other hand, in the past few years, I had experienced the pain of losing my father, mother, and child, and I couldn't be lively anymore. The young girl soon noticed the difference. Cecil was a bit older than she remembered, although he was more mature in temperament. Social experience always has its gains and losses. Cecil was still charming. There were plenty of people who liked a mature and wealthy man like him. Cecil realized that Hazel's speech was confused and called a doctor. After a series of examinations, it was confirmed that she only retained the memories before she was 20. Hazel insisted that she was only 20 and carefully counted the things that had happened recently in her memory, down to some details. Both Cecil and the doctor thought she had lost her memory. Hazel asked Cecil where her parents were. He fell silent. My father passed away just this year. That's the ironic part. His mistress also came for an internship this year. But for some reason, after the young girl cried in his arms, Cecil lied to Hazel. He told her that they had been married for 6 years. The young girl, who had just arrived and suddenly learned that her parents were gone, was taken back by him. There were still some things in the house we lived in that I hadn't had time to move out, which was enough to create the illusion of our married life for a few years. But Hazel was smart. Or perhaps Cecil let down his guard when facing this ex-wife who had lost her memory. He accompanied her attentively for a few days and also agreed to sleep in a separate room as she asked. He almost took care of his ex-wife meticulously. But the constant message reminders and incoming calls, and the work calls that could only be made in the study were enough to show that something was wrong. The 20-year-old Hazel had only been in a relationship with Cecil, and her last impression of him was when he went with the rescue team to save her. Unlike me, who had experienced the following years with him, she could still stay vigilant in this strange environment. Hazel found the divorce certificate in the bag she carried on the day of the car accident. She took the opportunity to go to a mobile phone repair shop to fix the phone that was broken in the car accident. The chat records revealed a lot. There were even messages from Cecil's mistress provoking me in my phone. After seeing these, she scolded Cecil and ran out that day. She was smart enough to contact my current good friend, who knew where I lived. The fact that I got divorced from Cecil, under the premise of reaching a consensus, hasn't been made public yet. For a large company, whether the boss's marriage is stable or not will also become a point of concern for investors. I have shares in his company, and I care about the interests. Fortunately, having fulfilled my obsessively, you knew to ask for money when you got divorced. Otherwise, I would be really annoyed. She showed an innocent look as if she had never seen the world. I've never seen so much money on a phone. I wonder if that's comeback. Cecil felt sorry for the money. I smiled. What's there to feel sorry for? I deserved it. Apart from being his ex-wife, I'm still his business partner. Back at my place, I discussed with Hazel about what had happened recently. She said that Cecil was really strange. Clearly, hadn't fulfilled my obsession. We had already divorced, yet he had been showing up around her for the past 3 months. His mistress even came to me and said that since Cecil and I are already divorced, why am I still pestering him? Cecil's child was probably already over 5 months old by now, and she was eager to take my place. I guess. I still can't understand what was wrong with Cecil's taste, but that's his choice, and it has nothing to do with me anymore. As for why Cecil also showed up at the hospital today, I asked Hazel to notify him as well. We can't be responsible for him forever. In the evening, when I was about to go to bed, the little girl who had my face, wearing a pajamas of a similar style, asked me, "Can we sleep together?" It's actually a rather strange feeling. Like sleeping with myself. We have the same face. And even the moles on our bodies are exactly the same. According to our ages. My body is 5 years older than hers. We're like a pair of sisters. I told her that 3 years had passed in her time and space since I arrived there. And I even applied for a postgraduate program abroad for her. Hazel. Mom's illness was discovered in time this time. And she has already had the operation. I said. At this point, the little girl was finally touched. She suddenly rolled into my arms and said in a muffled voice, "Thank you." It's still a bit strange to hear my own voice saying thank you. I reached out and patted her back. It's okay. She's my mom too. No matter which time and space. Those are my parents. I brought up the other Cecil to her. In case one day we switch back and you all go back too. How do you plan to deal with this relationship? She was silent for a long while before saying, "Didn't you already deal with it for me? I know myself. So naturally I know her too. If it was really dealt with properly, having fulfilled my obsession." He wouldn't have followed you here. I said. This Hazel, whose soul is obviously much younger than mine, hugged me a bit sadly and said, "You said that he used to like you so much. Why did he cheat? Is the mistress pregnant because he wants a child?" "No." I stroked her head and said, "It's because his heart has changed. That's all. The social status Cecil has after making a fortune is completely different from that in his student days. Among his business partners around him, there are plenty of that kind of people. Under the subtle influence, he probably thinks that the old self who used to believe in being with one person for a lifetime is naive. He is gradually exuding a corrupt smell under the influence of money and power." We fell asleep in each other's arms. A long time ago, I had a strange idea. Most people in this world seek unswerving love. But in fact, the one who loves oneself the most is oneself. And now, I can fall asleep hugging myself. Early the next morning, there was a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole and then opened the door. Standing at the door was the obviously younger Cecil. There was a wound at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were still red. He hadn't changed his clothes. And they were all wrinkled. "Hazel," he said pitifully. I crossed my arms and looked at him. "You should understand that I'm not your Hazel." He clearly already knew the truth. And then he peeked inside. Until the other me came out. Cecil was very excited when he saw her. "Hazel." But that Hazel took a step back. Due to different experiences and ages, her personality is still a bit different from mine. "What are you doing here?" Hazel asked him. "I came to find you." Cecil glanced at me at this moment and said, "She was the one who proposed the breakup, so it doesn't count." That's true in a sense. But he's really good at sophistry. Hazel was obviously taken aback for a moment. After a while, she said, "What she means is what I mean. And it counts. This isn't fair." After a while, the young man standing at the door said with red eyes, "Why should the dirty things he did be counted against me? I don't like anyone else. I only like you." It's very difficult to explain clearly these things about time and space travel. It may not be fair to him. But it wasn't caused by me and the other Hazel either. Hazel looked at him and said softly, "But your previous life experiences are the same. We know in advance and avoid a mistake. Isn't that a good thing?" "No," Cecil said. "I'm not him. Just because he looks like me and has the same name, why should the things he did be considered as things I did?" "Hazel, do you think this is fair to me?" "It's not fair. But there's no solution. I know very well that at this age, Cecil's love is genuine. Maybe he's different from the other Cecil. But who can ask Hazel, whose soul is only 20 years old, to gamble on this possibility?" I still let Cecil in. He said that he heard the other Cecil talk about what had happened in these years. And then he got into a fight with him and ran out. This address was also told to him by that Cecil. One thing Cecil said was right. At least the one who cheated wasn't him now. And he was the one who was innocently broken up with. The Hazel in my body didn't look directly at him. And I didn't have the position to ask them to do anything either. I let Cecil in just because we needed to discuss with the two of them about going back. It's undoubtedly unreasonable to have two identical people in one time and space. I suspect that they might go back at any time. Although I don't understand the principle. I rented a house for Cecil in the same building. And he moved in. But he came to our place from time to time. He called me sister, all the time. And the other one was his Hazel. Even though she was now in a 28-year-old body. He didn't mind at all. I took the younger Hazel to have a good experience of the current world. I took her to places that she hadn't thought of going to even when she realized she had money before. When we were out, she was the elder sister. And I was the younger sister. As for Cecil, I dug out one of the other him's cards. I hadn't used his money for a long time. So much so that I forgot to return this card when we got divorced. It's reasonable to let him spend his own money. During these days, I also took the opportunity to tell her about all the things I experienced in the 2 or 3 years after I went back, including interpersonal relationships. The most important thing was knowledge. I guessed that she had a lot to catch up on. After hearing all this, the younger Hazel wilted directly. "Do I really have to pursue being so excellent?" "Not necessarily. You can also apply for dropping out of school when you go back. I said softly. I asked my parents for some money to make some investments, and earned a bit. Although it's not as much as now. It should be enough for you to spend. The younger Hazel kissed me. Love you. MUA. Was I so exaggerated when I was young? I don't know why. But she really likes to kiss me. Or rather, she likes to kiss her own face. When I asked her about it, she gave me a shy smile. I don't know if you ever had this thought before. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I like myself more and more. I even want to kiss myself and be narcissistic. Now that I finally have the opportunity. What's wrong with letting me kiss you? Can I also let you kiss yourself? She leaned her face closer. I finally feel that there are some differences between me and her. Every time at this moment. That Cecil who clings on stubbornly and follows us around always looks at us hesitantly as if he wants to say something but holds back. He argues based on reason and tries to distance himself from the other him, not wanting to take the blame for the other. So sometimes he follows us out as well. I pushed the younger Hazel's face back. Stop messing around. After a while, she leaned over again and looked at me cautiously. I have another question. Can we kiss? I want to try what it feels like to kiss myself. Joyce suddenly came to the door with a big belly. Looking for the father of the child in her belly. Joyce is that mistress of Cecil's. She probably isn't a mistress anymore now. She was arrogant when she met me before. Now that she's been pregnant for several months, she looks a bit plump. The one who opened the door was the younger Hazel. She originally thought it was Cecil coming again. He had been running up and down recently, saying that he made some food and fun things and wanted to bring them up. But when she opened the door, she saw something even more annoying. President Hazel. Since you and President Cecil are already divorced, shouldn't you be more free and easy and give him back to me? Joyce, dressed in luxurious jewelry, looked at her and said, could it be that you want to be the mistress between me and him now? I heard the voice and came out. I was a bit stunned when I saw the person at the door. Of course, Joyce at the door was also stunned when she saw me. Because she saw two Hazel's. And one of them was young. At this time, I said, Sister. Joyce stared at our faces for a while. President Hazel. Do you have a sister? The younger Hazel gave her a look. What's it to you? She turned to me and said, it's okay. Just a rude person. After that, she leaned against the door and smiled at the other person. Joyce. If I heard you correctly, you're looking for me to get the father of the child in your belly? What's wrong? Can't you contact him yourself? Cecil and I are already divorced, but you still call him President Cecil. Has he not given you a proper status or does he not plan to give you one? Joyce was so angry that she couldn't speak. If I were you, I would focus on taking care of my pregnancy now instead of running around with a big belly. The younger Hazel looked at her with a half smile. You know what your bargaining chip is, right? Just at this moment, the elevator door opened, and a young man walked out. Joyce's eyes lit up immediately when she saw the person coming. She walked over and her tone became gentle instantly. President Cecil. Cecil was startled. He looked at the woman who was about to hug him blankly and instinctively took a step back. Who are you? When he looked up, he saw the door of that apartment open. And two women were watching the scene as if it were a good show. Cecil felt a tingling sensation on his scalp. He glanced at the pregnant woman in front of him. As if he suddenly understood something. He took another step back. I'm not your president, Cecil. Then, Lenaro Mosai. He took out his phone, dialed a number, and said through gritted teeth to the person on the other end. Come and take your little lover away right now. The 28-year-old Cecil whom we hadn't seen for a long time appeared. When he showed up, Joyce finally believed that the person she had been pestering just now wasn't him. The two people standing together were still different. Cecil took the person away and also apologized to the two of us. But when he left, he passed by the other version of himself. The other person said contemptuously, this taste. You really have a unique preference. It's good that they heard each other. My good mood was just ruined like this. I also felt uncomfortable looking at the young Cecil. So I simply told him to get lost. He was an eyesore. I thought that was it for today. But soon after, I heard arguing outside the door. When I opened the door, I found that the two Cecils were having a dispute at my door. The 28-year-old Cecil didn't send his mistress back. Instead, he turned back. As for the other one, I didn't let him in. And he actually didn't go back either. Then the two of them confronted each other. And it seemed that they even started fighting as they argued. The 23-year-old Cecil. What are you coming back for? Go and accompany your little mistress. She's even carrying your child. I wish you an early marriage and the birth of a precious son. The 28-year-old Cecil. What are you so complacent about? From what perspective are you laughing at me? Don't forget. We were essentially the same person. Get out. Who's the same person as you? If it weren't for you, I should have a wife by now. Who's like you? Giving up a good wife for a gold digger. Why don't you say anything? You have a few more years of social experience than me. If you weren't rich, do you think she'd be willing to be your little mistress? He knew exactly how to hurt himself the most. Or do you know in your heart that you just enjoy this woman speaking softly to you? Anything new and tried seems appealing. Right? He looked down on his future self from 5 years later. He could even be said to hate him. But the 28-year-old Cecil also knew how to provoke himself. Do you think Hazel will accept you just like this? What can you use to guarantee that you won't become the second me? The young Hazel really couldn't stand them competing to be the worst at her doorstep. She went to try to stop the fight. At least to drive both of them away. However, the 23-year-old Cecil was young and hot-tempered after all. He swung a punch at the other version of himself. Neither of them was an easy person to deal with. All this happened so quickly. The young Hazel stepped forward to stop the fight. Before she could say anything, she was pushed and stumbled backward, hitting the wall and bumping her head. Hazel. I quickly went to support her. And the two men suddenly stopped as well. However, the moment I touched the young Hazel, a wave of dizziness hit me. Then my perspective suddenly changed. And pain came from the back of my head. I seemed to have a premonition. I looked up and saw the face of the young Hazel right in front of me. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something. But at that moment, I couldn't hear any sound. Then there were exclamations in my ears. I didn't know which Cecil had touched me. Anyway, before losing consciousness, I just watched as the other version of myself disappeared. Along with her. The young Cecil also disappeared. When I woke up at home and saw Cecil sitting by the bed, I was silent for a moment. The back of my head hurt a bit. When I touched it, there was a big bump. Are you awake? How do you feel? Did they leave? I asked. Yeah. Then you can get lost too. I really didn't have a good expression for him. Cecil was silent for a moment. He asked me. You can be nice to the other me. But you don't want to see me anymore. Right? Otherwise. What? Cheating man? This nickname was given by the young girl. Cecil's face stiffened for a moment. He said. I'm sorry. This belated apology couldn't make up for anything for me. The best apology is for you not to appear in front of me. Every time I see you, I'll think of the 10 years I wasted. After Cecil left, I lay in bed and thought about this fantastical period of time. For them, it might only be a few months. But for me, it had already been several years. The emotions brought about by discovering Cecil's affair and the divorce had been mostly worn away. It's time to let go. It's just that these days, I occasionally slept in the same bed as the other me. The feeling of suddenly having an extra sister wasn't bad. I can't just live off the properties, investments under my name, and the 9-digit deposit for the rest of my life. I'm only 28 years old. 10 years doesn't take up too much of my life. I can't keep being entangled with the past. Before coming back from that time and space journey, I was still pursuing further education. If I want to continue now, I have to go through the application process again. I was busy planning my future and took the opportunity to travel around the world when I had time. I didn't pay any attention to other people's affairs at all. Until one day when I was traveling abroad, I received an unexpected call. Cecil's drunken voice came through. Hazel. How have you been recently? The handsome guy with blonde hair and blue eyes sitting opposite me listened quietly as I made the call. He couldn't understand Chinese, but his affectionate eyes just stared straight at me. I'm fine. What's up? Cecil said. If I said. I said I regret it. I'll deal with everything cleanly. Would you be willing to give me another chance? I paused for a moment. Cecil's breathing on the other end of the phone was particularly obvious. I said. You've drunk too much. Don't talk nonsense. After that, I hung up the phone. The young handsome guy opposite me was a friend I had recently met. He was very young. In his early 20s. I don't know if in their eyes. My Asian face looks especially young. Among the men and women who came to chat me up, most of them were young people. They generally thought that I was their peer. And even after learning my real age, they didn't mind at all. The feeling of being with young people isn't bad. When I returned to the country, I thought the time was almost right. And I could discuss with Cecil about making the divorce public. From the perspective of interests, I'm willing to declare that we separated peacefully. But smart people can see the clues. Not to mention that Cecil was about to have a child. I saw Cecil at my doorstep. He was a bit different from what I remembered. I don't know if he was too busy with work, but his clothes weren't as meticulous as before. He looked a bit haggard. Hazel. I actually don't like him calling me like this now. Cecil. For the things I told you on the phone, you can just contact me on the phone. There's no need to come here. Hazel. He grabbed my hand and his voice dropped a bit. Can we not make the divorce public? Not make it public? I counted the days and said to him. You're going to be a father soon. Do you want your child to be a bastard? After hearing this sentence, he suddenly stopped. His whole body slumped. And he looked at me with a very sad expression. Hazel. I don't want the child anymore. I've also asked Joyce to leave. Can we go back to the way we were before? I was wrong. I really love you. I can compensate you for whatever you want. Can you give me a chance to start over? The child is gone? This matter really took me by surprise. After all, when Joyce came to the door with a big belly last time, her belly was already very large. I don't know how the child was lost. And I don't care either. Cecil. We've already moved on. I said to him. No. Cecil said dejectedly. I can't let go. We shouldn't be like this. Hazel. Can you trust me this time? I'll give you all my property. Give me a chance. You love me? I suddenly found it ridiculous. Then when you were sleeping with another woman, kissing her and touching her, did you think in your mind that you were sorry for me? Or that she was younger than me? Cecil didn't say anything. I didn't want to make things too ugly with him. So I just said. I don't love you anymore. With your wealth, it's not difficult to find another woman. Don't bother me. I really don't want to have any more entanglements with him. After that, with all the procedures and various documents in order, I went to study abroad for 2 years. And news of my divorce from Cecil still spread. A golden bachelor in his late 20s or early 30s. There were plenty of women who liked him. But later, I heard from others that he had always been single. At that time, I was in a relationship with a man who was almost 6 years younger than me. My little boyfriend was young and energetic and was also a foreign student. But my state of mind had changed. And I didn't think this relationship would last long. I didn't hide the fact that I was divorced from him. I told him from the very beginning. But he still kept pursuing me. Maybe he also thought that a relationship during the study abroad period didn't matter. During the 2 years of studying abroad, this relationship lasted for about 8 months. I later found out that my little boyfriend came from a good family background. After finding out, I actually felt more at ease. With such a family background, I think he will probably choose a girl from a similar family background when he gets married in the future. I just don't want to get married. On the eve of returning to the country, I felt unwell and went to the hospital for a checkup. The examination results stunned me. I was pregnant. The doctor had said when I had a miscarriage before that it would be very difficult for me to get pregnant again. It turned out that during my marriage with Cecil, there really wasn't any sign of pregnancy. During this relationship, I didn't deliberately avoid getting pregnant either. After all, I knew my own body. Or is it that my young little boyfriend is too energetic? I originally thought that my money would probably be difficult to spend up in this lifetime. And I planned to donate it after I died. Now there's a little thing that can really spend money. I like children. After learning the news of my pregnancy, I advanced the plan to break up and return to the country to preserve the fetus. My little boyfriend's family background is extraordinary. His family probably can't accept such a child. And I need a child that completely belongs to me. Less than 3 months after breaking out and returning to the country, I happened to meet my ex-boyfriend Rainbow while taking a walk downstairs. He looked at my belly in surprise and then smiled brightly, running away with the baby. "Sister, are you playing so exciting?" According to the situation, Rainbow still had a year to graduate. He said, "The child is yours. And I'm yours too." The young boy is especially good at pestering. It took me a lot of effort to persuade him to go back to study. But as soon as there was a holiday, he would fly back to the country. Later, before Christmas, my belly was already very big. Once when I went out shopping, I happened to meet Cecil. He looked at my belly in surprise and suddenly gave a bitter smile. "Hazel, when did you return to the country?" I had a calm conversation with him. Cecil hesitated and asked, "Hazel, who's the father of the child?" "It has nothing to do with you," I said to him. A few days later, I saw Cecil at my doorstep again. He said, "Hazel, I heard that you're not married. If you don't mind, we can remarry, and I'll be the father of your child." I looked at him with mixed feelings. "This isn't your child." "I know. I don't mind." Just then, the elevator door opened, and my little boyfriend who was on Christmas vacation dragged his luggage out. Seeing this, he raised an eyebrow. Oh, the ex-husband." Rainbow was jealous. After closing the door, he said, "Who does he think he is? What can he compare with me? I'm younger than him. Richer. And stronger. So childish." Later, Cecil told me that my little boyfriend came from an extraordinary family background, and his family wouldn't accept someone like me. He hoped that I would think it through. Rainbow saw the message and clicked his tongue, saying, "Sister, he's slandering me. Aren't you going to do anything about it? You don't even want me to marry into your family. So how can he spread such false rumors that my family looks down on others?" After 10 months of pregnancy, my daughter was born. She was registered under my household registration. Rainbow sat by the bedside teasing the baby and sighing. "I really envy her. She can be registered under your household as soon as she's born. Unlike me, heading fulfilled sigh. Her father. I can't even gain status through my daughter." I remained silent. When my daughter was 1 month old, I held a 1-month-old baby celebration. Rainbow's parents, his elder brothers, sister-in-laws, and even his elder sister and brother-in-law all came to the door with gifts. Uninvited. He has 2 elder brothers and 1 elder sister. A big family. Rainbow quickly tried to prove his innocence to me. "Sister, I didn't tell them." The whole family gathered around my daughter in amazement, as if they had seen some rare little thing. Rainbow's mother took my hand and said with relief, "Hazel, we understand your situation. Just let us know if you want to get married someday." She said that among her 4 children, only her youngest son, who hadn't gotten married yet, had currently allowed her to become a grandmother. She just hoped that she would be allowed to come and visit her granddaughter in the future. Rainbow privately told me that his elder brothers and sister were not very willing to have children, and his parents were really eager to have grandchildren. I heard his elder sister whisper to her husband, "Can your family's genes guarantee having a daughter? If so, hadn't so I'd say, let's give it a try." Her husband. I had a rather complicated feeling. Maybe my only relative was my daughter. But my daughter seemed to have many relatives. Extra chapter from Cecil's perspective: the moment I walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I regretted it. When I saw Hazel in a car accident, fear welled up in my heart. I was afraid of losing her like this. Fortunately, having fulfilled my fashion, Hazel wasn't seriously injured. However, when she woke up, she had amnesia. She hugged me and cried, only remembering that I was her boyfriend and asking about her parents. After learning that she was already 28 years old and her parents had passed away, she cried like a broken doll. I didn't know what I was thinking. I told her a clumsy lie and took her home. We spent a few gentle days together. And I deeply realized that I loved Hazel. But the dream was just a fleeting moment after all. Joyce soft contacted me. And Hazel discovered the truth. She belatedly scolded and hit me. And then left. Later, within 3 months, I went to her place several times. And I knew exactly what was on my mind. But she didn't want to see me. Then one day, she took the initiative to call me. I met another me in the hospital. And I also met another Hazel. She was my Hazel. That Cecil, who was younger and more devoted than me, couldn't accept what I had done later. He drew a clear line with me. He fought with me. He said I was disgusting. I could only smile and tell him, "Don't forget, we are the same person. What I've done is also what you've done." He refused to admit it. But I told him where Hazel lived. When Cecil entered the door, I was standing at the corner of the corridor. I was actually jealous of him, jealous of the other me. He was clean. Unlike me, having fulfilled Weaponizes, who had betrayed Hazel. Later, the other us went back. I went to the house where Joyce lived and stared at her for a long time. She looked submissive and nervously at me. I couldn't remember what I had liked about her in the first place. Maybe it was just that I had heard those men at the drinking table talk too much about mistresses. I knew she liked me. And she was gentle. Or maybe I had entered a period of burnout in my marriage. I got a woman outside pregnant. At this moment, I felt that I was so dirty and didn't deserve Hazel anymore. Joyce carefully told me that the baby had kicked her. After a long silence, I said, Joyce, have an abortion. I'll give you a sum of money." She cried and begged me, saying that she was wrong and shouldn't have gone to find Hazel, and that she was willing to be my mistress forever. But I was indifferent. She naively thought she would become my wife, but I knew clearly that she was very different from Hazel. Joyce didn't want to have an abortion. She was afraid that I would force her. So she ran away one night. She wanted to go to a place where no one knew her, give birth to the baby, and then come back. But things didn't go as she expected. She encountered a chain car accident on the way, and she lost the baby. I gave her a sum of money. And the matter was settled. After the divorce, I thought of Hazel more and more often. I always felt that the 10 years I had with her were an unbreakable bond between us. Until I saw that there was a man by her side. She had a child with another man, and she was living a good life. Only then did I understand that those 10 years had only trapped me. And she had already moved on. Extra chapter from little Hazel's perspective clearly. They are the same person. Why is that woman so excellent? During the 3 years I was absent, she became an outstanding graduate and even went to study in the United States, by the way. She has no idea how miserable I was when I was making up for my studies. It's so good that my parents are alive and well. As for Cecil, he asked me if he remained faithful to me until he was 30 years old, I could give him a chance. I could only tell him that only friendship could last forever. It's okay to be friends, but forget about being lovers. He said it was unfair. But I couldn't gamble on the future for the sake of fairness. I knew he wasn't the other Cecil. But some things had changed and couldn't be reversed. We can have a connection, but it's hard for us to become lovers again. The end of the full text.